This episode of the Kingston Live podcast is brought to you by Grand On Stage. Get the most out of the Kingston Grand Theatre experience with access to pre-sale tickets, the best prices, and the best seats. Tickets for individual performances and subscriptions for the Grand On Stage season are on sale now at kingstongrand.ca.
Today you'll be hard-pressed to find someone who doesn't consider music a factor in their mental health. For some, music can be a way to find empathy. Sometimes it's a place to feel and process your emotions. And sometimes a song can perfectly articulate the feeling you're experiencing, opening a door to a deeper understanding. The relationship between mental health and music is long and deeply rooted, drawing people from all cultures and life stages to listen, write, perform, and connect. But what does that relationship look like in the context of commerce? And how far can healing go through music? This is Kingston Live, and today we sit down with psychotherapist Richard Tayo and musician Ricky Brandt to discuss the tenuous and complex relationship of music, musicians, and mental health. Hello, this is Kingston Live. It's John. My co-pilot for the first time is Jermaine Marshall, otherwise known as J Marsh.
Hi, that's me. That's what they call me most times.
And you do a lot of things. I think you're fairly well known in the community, but do you want to introduce yourself in a more elaborate way? I'm just giving you the opportunity if you wish.
I get around and I do things and I see people and I vibe. That's
You do those
me.
things. Yes, that is you. Yes. And Ricky Brandt is here.
I'm Ricky Brandt. I'm
also known as Cacao.
Also known as Cacao. I'm sure most people know me. I've been on the podcast before. I'm your local electronically supercharged, freaky funkadelic kind of guy. Yeah, let's go.
Excellent. And Rich has to top that. We have Rich Tayo, psychotherapist.
Yeah, I also have a band called Jukebox County. Poet, songwriter, psychonaut. I like to move into consciousness, stretching lyrics, and a lot of my music is informed by my work. So psychedelic work, therapy work, and working as a mental health and addictions crisis worker back in the day in Kingston.
Now I feel like my intro was lackluster. Like everyone piled theirs on. I'm like, ooh, I go around and I do things, but it's fine. It's fine.
I think there will be a J Marsh podcast in the future. That's kind of part of the reason I connected with you originally, but then we just kind of hit it off and you expressed an interest in co-hosting. So
that is a thing that happened. I do remember this.
We'll get to you in a deeper sense, I think, at a later time when the time is right.
I'll hold you to that.
Okay, please do. But today we're talking about mental health. Rich, I want to just some context because psychotherapist, I think for the lay person, we hear terms like psychiatrist, psychologist, we hear psychotherapist. Most people don't know the difference. Can you explain that?
I mean, there's a big difference. So psychiatrists are like medical doctors that can prescribe medication. Psychotherapist is basically... Usually you need to have a master's. I don't. I got grandparented in because of my work doing crisis work. So I had, 13 years accumulated of, practical experience. And so the College of Registered Psychotherapists of Ontario basically said, yeah, you meet the criteria and so you can do it. So basically a psychotherapist is someone who's licensed, who can dive into emotional, psychological, trauma work, that sort of thing, but can't prescribe medication and is not a MD or a PhD. So a psychologist would be a PhD, and then a psychiatrist is like a medical doctor that chose to go into the more mental health stuff. So basically it's like talk therapy. I am not a huge fan of talk therapy, so I don't do talk therapy. I do more somatic and relational work, and I do things like breath work and psychedelic work as well.
So mental health, big subject. I predict this probably won't be the only time we talk about this on this podcast, so I'm sure there'll be other opportunities to explore other things. But to get started, I mean, we all hear about how listening to music has many health benefits. It reduces stress, lowers anxiety, blood pressure, improves mood, etc. But there's an irony in that the music business seems to be a mental health hazard. in many ways. Ricky's laughing as I say this.
Hazards are definitely there. Caution is required for getting into the music industry. It's almost like a bubble of unknown circumstances that can hold heavy weight on one's own mind and ability to move forward with things. Yeah, it's wild.
Well,
I love it, though.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, I mean, we all love music, but being a musician can be certainly challenging. And I think everyone here, like, we all wear many hats. We're all musicians, but we all do other things. I know a lot of musicians in town have another job. They have a side hustle or music is their side hustle, and that can be challenging to navigate as well.
100%. As being a full-time musician, I don't work another job. I am straight up musician. It takes a lot of work, a lot of effort, and running the gamut of being your own manager, your agent, your publicist, your graphic designer, your mixer, your master, recording, you play all the instruments. It's tasking for sure. But the love of it, it definitely outweighs those points.
What do you think would take some of that weight off of you, like the unwanted weight? Because there's the music that certainly propels you through the dark stuff, but what is some of that dark stuff?
Well, some of that dark stuff, I mean, specifically for me, would have just been things like depression, general anxiety, malaise, being overworked, overstressed. And I found for me, essentially, what really helped was quitting drinking.
Yes. And you and I have talked about that just offline as well. How long ago has it been since you stopped drinking?
It's been a year and a month since I stopped drinking. And that alone, the music industry, we're so pressured to constantly drink. Artists at every level are thrown drugs and ways to cope and this and that and yes people, and to try to just wring out the soul of artists. But once I found that I let go of that kind of burden and that weight, that all that weight lifted into my energy and spirits of reinforcing, okay, my music is cool, I love what I'm doing, and being able to put more energy into my creative output and the way I navigate interpersonal relationships within the music community has just flourished. It's crazy how much that what we are seeking is not what we actually really need, and that it's like a barrier. You can see the light behind the slits and the shades, but you just need to draw those up and pull them off and like get out into the light, you know? That's
a good metaphor. I like that. You mentioned anxiety, and that's an interesting one because talking to musicians, we've been doing this podcast for almost 7 years now. And it's amazing how many musicians are very introverted, and for them, getting on a stage can be quite intimidating. And sometimes we see alcohol or drugs as a way to almost self-medicate. Would you agree with that?
I would. That rings my bell like the liberty itself, that it doesn't grant oneself.
And Rich, maybe you can comment on this, because one of my things I wanted to ask you was, you do see a lot of people self-medicating and self-diagnosing. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, it's funny. It's a lot of things, right? Because I feel like the creative process a lot of times is an introverted experience. And so there are a lot of artists, musicians that are, that kind of go into that inner landscape. They get those, those golden gems. And then they, of course, to make it real, to make it be seen, they need to move out and share it. And there's this desire to share the music, to be seen and to be heard and to be felt. And then so you have this friction, right? And then I guess like culturally, archetypally, we don't have a lot of models of the healthy artist, like that we have like the Jim Morrisons, the people that are these like reckless, drinkers and doing drugs and going on stage and they have to put on this show and like perform. Then it's like, well, if I'm going to be a musician, I need to be not well, like, because we don't have these models for our psyche to kind of latch onto.
So, I mean, I guess you're speaking a lot to the romanticization of the tragic artist and, again, like pain and trauma as a motivator, which I think is really interesting and really complicated because I know that in my own artistry, for a very long time, pain and trauma was kind of what I was using my music and my artistry as an outlet for, because I was going through a lot, a queer kid in an anti-queer country, in like a deeply religious household where a lot of my relatives are all like members of, ministers and evangelists and pastors, etc. Going to an all-boys high school. So my art became like an outlet for a lot of that pain and that sort of trauma. And I made a lot of really, really great stuff. And then there was a point in my, I guess, artistic journey when I got to Canada and I was like, oh, I have become so good at being unhappy that even though I'm no longer physically in that environment, my trained responses to things, generating art, generating music, engaging, is to look at the negative and to kind of go back into the headspace of, oh, but I feel trapped. So I had to start practicing being happy. And I stopped being able to make things for a while because that was where I was used to drawing from to create content. So I guess I'm curious about that in the, again, musicians, artists, and mental health context, when a lot of maybe the work that they do or the things that they channel emotions for come from those dark places, but then to move to a new place, you sometimes have to stop looking into the abyss.
And then you just got to face change head on with whatever path that is getting rocky at that point. You got to shift gears and really kind of look in the mirror, like with what you said, what kind of enables you or what disables you from really putting your heart into that creative content and like deriving a different mode. Okay, was in a sad phase. I lived through my 20s, right? Like I can come away from that, but that liminal space that one kind of floats in to get to the other side of that amount of change is sometimes really daunting. It's like going back again when I first started getting sober, I had lost all sense of knowing who I really was and how to establish that again, establish the sense of Ricky that people see, the sense of Ricky that I know I can become, and then how to put that through my art. And then that gradually unfolded and I was able to do that, and it was a beautiful thing. But yeah, it's challenging.
Do you find that the audience is something that facilitates that change, or is potential anxiety about, well, the audience knows this Ricky, how will they feel about the Ricky and the music of the Ricky that comes after I change?
Yeah, that was a really tough kind of thing to deal with, is like, could I be the Ricky that people know how to present that? And even still on stage now, I notice I don't interact with the crowd as I used to. It also depends. Every show is really its own thing. And if you got no crowd, you're just kind of there, whatever, playing for yourself and like not really giving a care. But I think that's one thing that you always have to keep in mind when playing, especially to a crowd, that people are there to see it. People are there for the love. People are there for the energy. And take that in, mix it up, right?
Something I worry about with a lot of artists, especially ones that have been around for a little while and have established themselves, is you create a brand, whether you realize it or not. You have this image that people have in their minds. And when you go through a situation maybe similar to yours, Ricky, where you've quit drinking and you feel, you've changed, right? Maybe you're not a different person or a new person, but the change has happened. And then you find yourself in a situation where you have an audience that expects certain things from you.
Old Ricky.
Maybe, yeah. And I'm not...
Wow, Ricky.
Ricky, don't lose that number, Ricky.
Oh, no. No, he lost it a lot of times.
But I think of like older bands who, I won't name names, but bands that are way past their prime, who are still acting on stage like they're 20 years old, right? Mm-hmm. And at what point are you becoming inauthentic and And what sort of effect does that have on your current being? And there's got to be this kind of push and pull of what do people expect and what do I want to be? Or how do I see myself now?
That's a really profound question in the sense that I was recently chatting with some other artists about this question. Is your role as an artist to the art you want to make or the people you want to share that art with? Where does that responsibility lie? How do you balance that out? And to your point, what does it do to you as somebody having to balance what you want to do with what the audience expects of you? Kind of knowing that sometimes, and this is where we got into some very heated waters in this discussion, sometimes your audience can actually give you good insights into yourself. Like sometimes your audience can actually have, like I remember once when I was very young and I wrote a poem about like liquid love ever falling through my glass fingers, son as you fall on the floor, et cetera, et cetera. And a friend of mine said, oh, this is a great poem about alcoholism. And I'm like, oh, I just was using like the liquid as a metaphor, but that's insight into, maybe. So yes, this idea of how do you balance that, kind of what you want to do, what the audience expects, and what tensions that makes in you as an artist, as a creative.
Mm-hmm. Well, Rich, is that something that you see? Because I know you, in your Kingston Live bio, it says you've developed music-based mental health programs.
Yeah, that was in a former life. That was when I was a crisis worker. We developed a group that basically taught mental health and coping to youth, and we went into shelters, and it was sort of a way of basically just creating this common friend. So we would go in, we'd have a music group, and then suddenly we weren't this like crisis worker anymore. We were this like dude, so it kind of took away that stigma. And then it also gave us a clear and a safer way to talk about mental health, right? So we could talk about Needle and the Damage Done by Neil Young about addiction without talking about the person's addiction, but we were sort of talking in a safer way around it. So, and then, using metaphor, because with music, as you guys know, like you have to have balance. You have to, if the drummer is not keeping time, then the whole song is going to sound like crap. So if you are not sleeping, then that's going to creep into your mental health, right? So it kind of, music is a good metaphor for like holistic, balanced systems. And so it was just a natural way of, I guess, like teaching about mental illness, mental health with kids and with folks that maybe didn't have an opportunity to learn about it in a different way. So that doesn't come back to the necessarily what we were saying, but I guess to speak to what you were saying with my music, and part of it is sometimes people aren't ready yet for the vision. It's like you share your imagination, and sometimes you might get feedback of like, I don't really like that song, but maybe they're not seeing what you're seeing yet. A lot of artists, they're not, like, they're ahead of their time, right? And that's part of like that vanguard idea that after a few generations is like, oh yeah, that was really meaningful music. That spoke to us now, but it didn't at the time. So I think sometimes we want to take feedback from people, but then also it's something that we want to just cherish and hold and know that it was meaningful for us in the process, not even in the delivery, but in the process. Like, okay, yeah, when I made that song, this was important to me. And then now I let go of whether someone likes it or not. It's like, it's important to me, and we'll see what happens. Maybe someone sees a different interpretation of it. And sometimes that can be hard on the ego, though. It's like, if you love this thing and then it's like, oh, it didn't do well, or someone didn't like it, that can like damage the musician's ego, and that can be tough. But I think ultimately art is art for the sake of creating it, not necessarily the value of what someone sees in it.
So I was going to say, in terms of damaging the artist's ego, and I think that's another thing about music and the industry and the act of sharing your music with people, which is that it's an incredibly vulnerable act, especially in a society where people are actually taught not to be vulnerable, not to be cringe, not to be embarrassing. Putting together music and a piece of art about something that you care about, something that has maybe caused you grief or pain or intense joy, like your feelings, and sharing that with the world is such a risky thing to do.
It's a profound act of courage.
So brave. And then to kind of have to go through the process of people sharing all these different thoughts about your thoughts and your thinking.
Or someone
it's like showing someone your journal.
Yeah. When you're doing your piece that you just can't wait to share, and then play Wonderwall, that can be tough, right?
Yeah, if you're just like shredding or something. Freebird! It's just like, okay.
Which speaks to the value that I think, like you said, music, everyone loves music. There's a connection to music, but then there's this lack of value with musicians because it's like you have to grind and like get that gig, and then it's like you just maybe pay your telephone bill, So there's this lack of value that we put, you put so much time and effort into this thing, and then it's not as valued as, plumbers and, electricians. Like it's a valuable addition to culture, but not valued in the sense of monetarily.
Yeah, I was about to. Sorry, go ahead.
Which is wild because music saves lives. If you give so many people the chance to kind of speak their mind about the toughest times they have ever had, people hitting rock bottoms, you'll hear very often that it's a point of like, oh, this song got me out of this, or this song got me through this or that. And that commodity is worthless to, distributors and labels. Like, how can you put a price on that when, like you say, like plumbers or electricians, framers, or, whoever, somebody at McDonald's is, how do you monetize and like reference that strength and how much weight that music has to people, right?
I think it's indicative of a broader kind of issue in our society, the misalignment of value and the misplacement of value and value compensation. Because to your point, it's not that the music doesn't have value and immense value and intense value and, value out the wazoo. It's that what's compensated is not the music that does this, is oftentimes the industry that exploits it and the non-creatives. The movie Sinners recently kind of explored that a lot. I don't know if anyone here has seen Sinners. If you haven't seen Sinners, I highly recommend. You've seen it?
No, I plan on
You have to see Sinners. When you watch it in the context of it as a metaphor as well about the music industry, and it's very good on that. But I always think back to this song by ABBA that I really quite like called "Thank You for the Music," the songs I'm singing, thanks for all the joy they're bringing, which is again a song about like music is so powerful, music is so helpful. And I almost want to like ask, because one of the things that I really find interesting is music in a religious context. Like I mentioned before, I grew up Pentecostal. And so when you were just saying a while ago about kind of, oh, this song brought me through like such a dark period in time, my mind went to religious music and how like a lot of times that's what I would hear in churches and other kind of like religious gatherings, that, oh, this spiritual hymn and the spiritual song is what kind of brought me through. But in those same environments, there is sometimes a vilifying of music that is not the religious music. And so oftentimes growing up as an artist, like in the church, a kind of trauma that I had to go through, which a lot of other like black artists like Nina Simone, they talk about, Grace Jones growing up in like religious musical environments where they're like, oh yes, we also recognize the power and healing of this music, but we're also looking for other types of healing that this music can't provide. And then to have, your fellow music listeners be like, well, no, you can only try to find meaning in this music. This is the music you're allowed to find meaning in. How dare you want to go and find meaning and solace and healing in other music? So sometimes like kind of, I guess, sort of I'm looking for here, gatekeeping of mental health and music and what music can be used for mental health versus like this idea of, oh no, that rock music is evil, it's going to make you do violent things, or that emo music is going to make you depressed, as opposed to it is actually something that's helping with depression and with kind of strong feelings. So is that something that you see a lot in your day-to-day, just kind of people maybe misvaluing or undervaluing different genres of music, different types of music?
Big time. We used to do a thing where it was like homework was, I'm quoting here, prescribe yourself a song, so it's like note your mood, note like, if you're having anxiety or you're having a low mood, and then pick a song, and it could be one that you know and love, or just look around, and so, because I think everyone's going to be different. Everyone's going to have their music medicine. And I think, to take that from someone and say, no, that's actually not really great music. Because we used to go around too, and we'd introduce ourselves in our favorite song at the time. And then it's cool because it kind of built this way of having compassion, because it's like, oh, wow, before I didn't really like country music, but the way that you talk about country music is how I talk about, rock music. And so I get you now. I get country music. I get that it does something for someone, right? Mm-hmm. So it's kind of cool. It was a neat way of just building that common friend and that sort of compassionate musical heart, I guess we'll call it.
Ooh, well, now I'm curious about what everyone's current music medicine might be. If you had to like pick a song and say, well, this is a song I'm listening to these days as my sort of music medicine pill. And what kind of medicine is it providing for you? A dose of courage, optimism, a soft place for sad feelings to land?
Everybody's looking at me.
Well, John, you are a fearless leader.
That's a tough one. I mean, I think I'd be like a lot of people. I'd go back to old favorites. Like my all-time favorite rock band is Rush. I can't be in a bad mood when I listen to Rush. There's certainly newer songs that would perk up my mood, but Rich, is that something that's common with people? Like, do they seek out new things, or is it like old favorites that they would...
I mean, a bit of both, right? Because there's like that nostalgia, and there's just like this... It's almost like, going, you could be like, well, I could talk to this person I don't know and they might help me. Or I could talk to an old friend and I know that they're going to be reliable. I know where they're going to bring me. And so in a lot of ways, I think people go back to what's familiar. But then to hear a new song and to immediately love it, then this is a new best friend, right?
Mm-hmm.
I know that currently I've been listening to, and I want to make sure that I get the name right, because it's a collaboration between two artists, but it's The Way of the World, Noah Cyrus and Ella Langley. My father passed away recently, and just a lot of people in my life have been kind of dropping like flies. It's been wild out in these streets. But it's a song that really kind of came out of nowhere and really hit me in like a profound way. The first line in it is that the first thing you learn is grieving and loss, because you can't return to the safe place you've lost from your mother's womb into the chaos of a cold hospital room. And I'm like, whoa, okay, well, I'm kind of locked in now. It's speaking to me, because I also almost died during childbirth in terms of like umbilical cord wrapped around my neck. But in terms of songs, I guess nostalgia-wise that I go back to a lot, ABBA. Because anytime I listen to an ABBA song, I'm reminded of just like being a kid running around, dancing to like, Mamma Mia, the king has lost his crown. And so I find that the nostalgia of that is very healing. Yeah.
Well, the thing I love about music is there's so many dimensions and so many layers to it. Like you connected with a specific lyric, which is wonderful. And some people might connect with just the sound of a song or the beat or the melody or, any combination of those things. And music is just so dynamic that way. And I think that's one of the many reasons we come back to it so much.
Yeah, sometimes we want to like music to meet us, and sometimes we want it to take us elsewhere, know, and it can be cathartic, and that's the beauty of it. Whether lyrically or rhythmically, I think it's like... It's such a great toolbox to have. To forget about music is to dive into, I think, darkness. We didn't have that.
Well, something that's been on my mind lately is there's that thing, the cathartic hypothesis. Is anybody familiar with that? It's this idea that if you lean into, say, your negative emotions, that you will eventually purge them. But there's a wealth of research that finds that it does the opposite, that you aren't putting out the fire, you're fanning the flames, essentially.
There's a
neurons that fire together, wire together. If you think angry, you're going to be angry. You're going to become angry.
Yes.
If you think positive, you're going to be positive. You're, again, going to become the light.
Simone Weil has this philosophy called of attention, where she says that the things you pay attention to are what construct your reality, because it's what your brain is looking at, is focusing its time on, and your mind, your body, your time constructs your reality, what matters to you.
Yes. I guess my question, I guess I'd put this to Rich. Obviously, we don't want to ignore our emotions. Emotions are important. They're trying to tell us something. But at what point can you take them too far? At what point are you leaning too far into your emotions, where it does, to Ricky's point, neurons that fire together, wire together, and what Jermaine said as well?
Yeah, it's interesting because I have a different perspective, which would be, Stan Groff, who's this kind of pioneer in a lot of the psychedelic space. He says a symptom is something halfway out. And so, for example, if you're feeling sadness, and there's a difference, I guess, between like, it's like, I'm just going to mope and I'm going to feel this sad and, like kind of like listen to sad music and cry and, because that's like maybe cathartic, but without processing, right? So the difference between processing and catharsis. For him, it's like, okay, I'm feeling sadness and I'm going to be the adult and I'm going to be the child and I'm going to hold this sadness and allow it to be felt and sort of stay with it and almost get out of my head about it, but really feel the emotion in my body and in my, like the sensations that I'm feeling. And then it might be like, okay, I gave space for that sadness that I've been pushing down, right? So I think there's a fine line between avoiding things and kind of like exiling things and allowing them to come up and out, right? And it's like when I work with people often, let's say they have grief that's like, a lot of grief. We're not going to say, let's feel all this grief. It'll be like, okay, let's feel a little bit of this and really feel into the body with it and let it kind of move through you. And then it's almost like you've taken, 10% of it and you've sort of processed it, and then there's still more, but you're not getting stuck in that kind of grief vortex. Instead, you're really feeling it, allowing it to move through your body. And that's really kind of what psychedelics do, right? As some folks know, is like it gives you, like, mushrooms, for example, they're composters, right? They'll show you what you need to process, and then they'll help you process it. And then it's like, okay, now that's gone. So I guess the difference would be keeping your frontal lobe online and recognizing, okay, I'm feeling sadness and I'm going to feel this. I'm not just going to, mope in it and kind of stay with it and drown myself in sadness and kind of like, let these neurons fire and wire together and kind of like stay in it and get to know it and like stare at this black hole. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I guess that'd be my perspective on it is there are healthy ways of moving through it, and then there are ways of just staying stuck in it.
No, that's great. And I'm glad you said that. I think then the question is, how does one... And I think I commented earlier about people self-prescribing, self-diagnosing, that sort of thing. And Ricky, we talked about alcohol earlier, which can be a self-diagnosing, self-prescribing sort of solution to these things. I guess the question is, how do we approach professional help?
I mean, I think it reflects a larger cultural and social issue of like just lack of mental health literacy and like lack of valuing anything having to do with like positive coping. Because, like the Ontario government recently like making alcohol everywhere. It's like, great. Now I can't say to people, just don't go to the LCBO. Now it's like, well, now you're at the grocery store and it's there, So we're in this sort of weird space of like, take care of your mental health, but we're valuing alcohol so much that we're putting it everywhere, and people should just figure out how to deal with it in a safe way, right? So we're kind of like, letting them loose in the world.
So do you see that as kind of an enabling?
I mean, yeah, because we don't teach positive mental health. We don't teach coping. We don't teach, like a lot of the things that I teach, people will be like, why don't we learn this in school? Like, why don't we learn this stuff in elementary school? Like I do stuff around safe touch, for example. And it's like, we don't learn about this stuff like safe touch or mindfulness or self-compassion, So it reflects a larger issue. But to come back to this, I guess it comes down to intention in a lot of ways, like, okay, am I having this drink to like shut up this feeling? Right? Or am I having this drink because I'm feeling pretty good and I'm going to connect with some people and, cheers and connect and, and can I pay attention to how I'm doing? Do I have that skill set or that ability? Or am I just sort of like, oh, that feels really good, I'm going to have another one, and then suddenly we go down this dark.
Well, is that question of, am I doing this to feel good or to keep from feeling bad?
Yeah.
Right? Like at what point does someone know? And I guess it's a tricky thing because if you are in that state, you're trying to disconnect from reality to a certain point. So I imagine you'd have a lack of awareness, right? So at what point does someone know it's gone too far? What are some of the warning signs that things have gone too far?
I mean, it's hard to say because it depends on the person, but I would say probably relationship, like, do I have people around me that I'm
Ricky's nodding. Yeah.
Like simple stuff like, activities of daily living. So like, am I sleeping okay? Like, how's my mood? How's my
your
energy?
hygiene?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, are people kind of looking
at me? Am I eating well? All that stuff.
Am I eating?
Am I doing the things that I want to be doing?
Am I being kind to myself? Right?
Yeah.
Like if I'm telling myself I'm a piece of shit every day, then like maybe that's a good reason to talk to someone, right? But then there's a lot of stigma around mental health and addiction, and then when they reduce the stigma about it, then there's wait lists, right? So it's like, now people are more safe to go and get help, and then they get told like, great, it's gonna be 6 months to get into this, addictions group or whatever, right? So don't mind me, I definitely bash the mental health system because I've worked in it and I feel like it's an over medicalized system that is sort of pretty depersonal. So I think in a lot of ways the grassroots, the more community stuff is gonna help people more than going to talk to a psychiatrist and then it's like, here's medication for your depression, even though your depression is based on, years of grief and all this other stuff. And the medication is supposed to somehow erase that, right?
So I have a question then, because I always like to think about and talk about not just having a therapist, but rather therapeutic infrastructure. So going back to like how we were talking about music in different spaces, providing things to like religious communities, like healing and like a collective space where after the music you can talk about values and why that song was hitting you so much, and you can grieve together, you can commiserate together. In looking at, I guess, public music environments and public music spaces as spaces that could potentially foster that, how do we go about that? Because I know, like, we'll have, for instance, a mosh pit where it's like you go to a music event and, you know, you vibe and you have like that physical touch and that connection, and people talk about that, oh my God, I went to the concert and I felt so good. But then connecting and building, I guess, that therapeutic network through that music event doesn't always happen after the fact or as intentionally, if that makes any sense. Is one of the places that we could meet this gap in terms of mental health is through the music and through the music gathering spaces. And what might that look like?
Open mic at Musiki Cafe every Tuesday. I think that's a great space for people to come open up. And like a lot of people, it's their first time, so they getting up performing, so they have a lot of anxieties about performing. People come to perform to, again, get away and get out of it all, get out of their head. And through that, all these connections are made. And that's what I was thinking just before about the whole mental health infrastructure ideal, is that we've become such tiny islands in our own living spaces in our time now that our neighbors used to be, you know, the best mental health experts because we'd just talk about everything. We'd get out there and not just be on our phones comparing ourselves to whatever, right? So I think like a place like Musiki's open mic, not only just because I host it, is that people come and people make those real connections. You can see people coming out having really bad days. And then after, once they start talking to people, they get up and they perform. There's this immense release that comes with it. And again, with everything we've been talking about through the psychedelics, through actual medical system of like, you know, going to group therapies or different CBT therapies, it all has this essence of release. And I think that the musical space that looks like that is that a continuation of people coming together, and it's community based. It's really friends getting to know each other, make new friends, make connections, and really open up with everything that they can and are willing to be able to put out there. Because once you get it out, it's out there. You release a pressure valve and you find tools like playing, like coming out every week, because you get to know that, hey, this releases some pressure off of me for the time being, and I can vent that in a very healthy way. And yeah, I'd say that's definitely what it looks like.
Yeah,
I've seen it for the past couple years hosting the open mic, and it's sometimes a spot where people have been having a terrible week, and that's where they want to come because people share their stories and are that vulnerable. It's like group therapy, but like open mic. It's great.
We're such social creatures, right? That to be interacting with someone, it is very medicinal. It's very healing. You know, it turns on that social engagement system and sort of gets us, you know, because to be on our phones, to be isolated, that's, I think they say like loneliness is worse than many other conditions because
they put prisoners in isolation to punish people. Why would we do that to ourselves, right?
I read a book that made the case that loneliness is the new smoking.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes me think too of a wicked idea, which, I mean, I really like the idea of listening parties, you know, like having music and then talking about it, right? And things like podcasts and things like, you know, I wonder like what venue would allow, you know, a band to play and then have like a half an hour discussion with the folks there later, you know?
The Kingston Grand Theatre does do that. I've hosted a few talkbacks at the Kingston Grand Theatre, like where, for instance, they had like Bo Dixon and like the Freedom Singers. They had this really beautiful I think it was 5 women like choir, like they were. The voices are so powerful. And afterwards we had like talkbacks and conversations. But I don't think that happens as much in terms of like Kingston Grand Theatre-esque venues.
Or local bands and
a cacao rave or something.
But you know what was a lot of fun at the Skeleton Park Arts Fest this year was I was also able to host a talk with Tiny Horse and the Trash Panda Brass Band, and that was also really kind of well attended and a lot of really good conversations. It's funny because someone said they'd love to see more conversations like these with musicians, with artists, like in the landscape that they could come to and be a part of, because I guess those don't really happen like as a regular yearly thing. Like there's podcasts, but there aren't like come and talk with and connect to.
This episode of Kingston Live is brought to you by Grand Onstage. Grand Onstage takes you beyond the regular Kingston Grand Theatre experience. It's a subscription option that gives you access to pre-sale tickets, the best prices, and the best seats. That means you can customize your own individual package starting at just 4 performances. Want to bring friends? Subscriber pricing applies to their tickets too. And if your plans change, just exchange your tickets for another performance. Tickets for individual performances and subscriptions for the Grand Onstage season are on sale now at kingstongrand.ca.
The new album I have out coming soon is like, it's about a lot of these things. And my idea is to do sort of like a storytelling, song sharing thing and have something like this where it's like, because it deals with a lot of addiction and mental health and psychedelics and reality bending kind of things. And my intention at this point is to have something like that where we create a container that's safe to talk about these things and to normalize them and to kind of almost use fictional characters as like placeholders, you know, to be like, oh yeah, well, we're not talking about any specific person, but this archetype of the outsider, alcoholic dude on the street, and like how we just turn the other way and we don't see these issues because it's easier to look away until we face something, and then it's like, oh crap, this affects everyone. You know? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So these conversations, I think, are important.
Yeah. Well, there's no substitute for connection. I feel like we're connecting, having this discussion, which is great. It doesn't help that we're such an individualistic society. I mean, we like to pretend that we're not, but I mean, everything is so isolating, the way we consume media, the way we create media. Rich, you had a discussion with Rob a couple of years ago on one of his radio shows, and you said something that struck me. You talked about getting out in nature and something deeper than just your ego, which I really liked. And we talk a lot about self-care, which is very important, but I feel sometimes we can go too far the other way, where we're reaching a point where we're focusing too much on oneself. And is that detrimental? Like, anything can go too far in one direction. Can you reach a point where that is detrimental to your mental health? And if so, where is the balance?
I'm a big champion for self-care, but I think that, yeah, sometimes self-care could mean, oh, I'm going to like feel more connected to my community. I'm going to do, you know, maybe self-care means going to the music open mic to be like, okay, this is an edge for me and it scares the shit out of me, but I'm going to go and do this because I know that at the end of the evening, I'm going to feel like connected. I'm going to maybe meet a few people. When I moved to Kingston, that was how I met most people, was I would go to open mics and just be like, who are you? What are you doing? You know, and just connecting in that way. But similar to what you were saying, Ricky, you know, if you're sort of just focusing on, self-care, that's different than expanding that to be like, how do I contribute to my community? How do I make it so that I can be a safe person for someone else? You know, even like when I'm getting my groceries, I'm going to like have a little chat and smile to this person and be like, you know, so then they're like, oh, okay, cool. There's still personable people here. You know, I'm not just like, you know, on my phone when they're putting the groceries in and I'm, you know, not even talking to them, not even making eye contact, like treating them as, you know, this machine, which now machines are doing that work. But yeah, I guess it's hard to say because once again, everyone's going to be different. There's different medicines that work for different people, like community or, you know, relationships, nature, being in nature. So not being, I guess, stuck on like, the me, I need to be good, because sometimes it's the things we're seeing in the world that's causing our grief in the first place. And we can do all the self-care we want, but until we grieve the planet, or we grieve the things we hear across the world, or we grieve the person we saw on the street, we're not going to know what's actually going on inside of us. Because if it's our issue, then it's not a universal issue. And so we don't take care of anything but ourselves unless we see ourselves in the bigger issues happening in the world.
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting you mentioned that because I was thinking on a Nina Simone quote when she mentioned that the job of artists is to reflect the times that we're living in, or at least that's how she perceives her job, her role as an artist. And what it kind of does to be living in difficult times, and then as an artist having to channel all your feelings and also kind of reflecting your culture's feelings and reflecting what you're seeing people feel about ongoing times. and then to perform that in front of people. And I think one of the things about grieving that I sometimes think about is how part of the process of grief is that you learn how to carry your grief. Because when grief first happens, it's surprising, it's shocking, it's new. It's like a weight that you're lifting for the first time. But then over time, you figure out, okay, when I lift it like this, it hurts my elbow. But if I lift it like this, it actually comes up more easily. You get a bit more able to kind of carry that grief so that when you encounter it, it's not as much of a shock and a surprise. And so I think to your point of kind of this idea of, as you grieve, be thinking about like, how do I want to move through this world once I've become able to carry my grief? Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily grieving as an end all to itself. And if you are reflecting the ongoings in the world, again, ask yourself, going through this process of grieving where, yes, I have to come to terms with what does it look like or feel like for me to carry the heaviness of what's going on in the world and still move. That makes any sense at all.
Yeah, it's like to sing a song about grief then allows the audience to have permission to be like, oh, yeah, okay, I do feel that too. And in Ireland, they would do group wailings, right? Where it's like a whole community is grieving together. And then so it's not just my grief anymore. It's like we're collectively grieving. And maybe sometimes sharing music can be like that, where it's like you're offering that and then you're seeing that it comes back to you. And it's like it allows for that to open up deeper floodgates maybe of some sort.
I want to go back to something we talked about earlier. We talked about warning signs and signs that things had gone too far. And Ricky, you were nodding very enthusiastically. Do you mind sharing with us what told you that it was time to stop drinking?
Oh, man. All the warning signs. Well, I had a long relationship end with my then fiance, and then a couple of years passed, kept drinking, got kicked out of the house. My hygiene wasn't good. My skin wasn't good. My literal body was falling apart on me. And then last year, I went into an immense kidney failure as being a kidney transplant patient with chronic kidney disease. My kidney failed on me. I went into the hospital for 2 weeks, line out my neck to an artery, a PICC line in my left arm to my heart, a few biopsies, and much blood product later. I then got shingles because my immune system was so low, and then was in the hospital alone, not alone, but in isolation for 13, 14 days. So for 2 weeks, finally got out. Played Folda 4 days after I got out of the hospital, and I had played Homegrown while my kidney was like completely failing. So literally the day after Homegrown last year, I went into the hospital and they said, you're going to lose your kidney. And I still played the show. So after Folda, after I got out of the hospital, first thing I did, wouldn't you know, go and get a 6-pack. Smoke a ton of weed, just not good. And then come the summer, I realized how much it was affecting my life, how much it had affected my life to the point where I could have lost my kidney, been on dialysis, been on the wait list for another transplant. That was huge. It's like literally losing your life and your health. And I witnessed that, and that was the wake-up call for me. It was quite mind-blowing, actually. And then I finally took the plunge and said, all right, well, I don't need this anymore. I remember the last day I drank, I got so violently ill that I said, I'm never doing this again. I'm never doing this again. I'm never doing this again. It was the literal rock bottom. There's ways in which I could have died, and that was it for me. I think it's unfortunate with addiction and mental health that you don't see where your ups and downs are. You're swimming through this tide and you're trying to get around. You're trying to find some air somewhere, whether you're dealing with grief, whether you're dealing with anxiety, major depression, ADHD, bipolar, all these things I have. But it's like you're grasping, but you don't know where to. And yeah, for me, it was that absolute rock bottom of almost losing my life. And sometimes, especially for addicts, that's where it has to happen. And you see it a lot, and it's really unfortunate. You see people lose their house, their lives, their job, their family, and still they continue to submerge themselves in this darkness where you think you're coping, but you're just doing so much more damage, and you can't see it around you. You're blind to it because of the void, the emotional voids that it caused you, the bridges you burn. That was, for me, everything that led me to the point to want to find the light and rise above the own challenges that I put on myself, deal with my grief head on, allow the gaskets to release some pressure in a healthy way, in a healthy understanding, with supports and family, love. That's a big thing for a lot of the addictive kind of choices that we make, that we hold, is that there's a severe lack of love. And not for me that it was a severe lack of love, because I've always had people around me. I don't know, pour love for me. It's honestly the most beautiful thing. Like, the love you give is the love you receive. And when you start to take that off of your scope and you hide in those addictive personalities, those quantities, that is the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde kind of sense in the dichotomy of oneself. It will always bubble up to the surface and show you what you need to move on. And usually it all comes back to love, I find. And then once you have an indifference to what you're going through personally, then you spiral. So you got to be adamant with how you treat yourself, how you care, and love yourself, love within, give love and receive love. Yeah.
Well, Ricky, I'm very grateful you were able to rise above that. I'm grateful you're still here.
Thank you.
And I'm grateful that you felt you could share that with us. What would you say to someone who is in a similar position of, I think I've called it a few times, self-medicating?
The biggest standout in my mind is that if I'm talking to that person who's going through that shit, I'd say, you're loved. You have the ability to be loved. You have the capacity for love. And to be able to rise above any of those situations is going to take the strength of the entire world in your mind. It's like Atlas holding the world on your shoulders. You don't have to hold it, because there are people and like supports around that can help. Even if you don't think there are, or you don't see an end in sight, there's always ways out of the position you're in. And it takes the mind to be able to truly overcome that only if you want it. And that's why I create a lot of funky, upbeat dance music. Because, like we say, the music that you listen to and go into these spaces to help kind of like make you feel better. How can you be pissed off if you're listening to funk music? How can you be mad if you're listening to dance music, right? And get your feet moving, get your heart pumping, get your mind and brain oxygenated, get yourself out of that space. And when you're dancing with people, the body comes to this really cool perspective where the heart and the mind become very open to people. That's why it's very easy to like fall in love on the dance floor and like see the love that is around. It's because everybody's there losing themselves to dance, right? And that's why I like making electronic dance music. And that just allows people to explore a cosmos where they've never heard, have bass sounds just tickle the crap out of their spine. And yeah, sub-frequencies can actually heal. And music, the waves, the way our brains process the alpha, beta, theta waves and everything, music lifts our vibration. So that's why I aim to do what I do.
Rich, when we talk about psychedelics, is that sort of almost an equivalent? Because I know part of, and you're the expert, please tell me if I'm spouting nonsense here, but I've heard that part of it is just kind of giving that little window, right? And just kind of opening things up, kind of like Ricky's talking about.
Yeah, and I will say, like, because a lot of people come to me, they're like, oh, like this, like psychedelic's gonna cure me. It's like this whole silver bullet thing. So definitely don't want to say like psychedelics are for everyone or that they are gonna do anything for anyone that's not ready to do it themselves. But yeah, neurologically, they disrupt the default mode network, which basically is the ego. And so it kind of gives you this softer sense of self, maybe being able to imagine yourself as maybe connected to nature or one with nature. And so for end-of-life distress, for example, it's very helpful for people because they start to see that, okay, yeah, my physical body is dying, but I'm not dying. Like there's a part of me that is going to live on, and there's something that I'm connected to that could never be destroyed. And so, yeah, psychedelics can open that up and perhaps, especially with good integration, could perhaps help someone feel like the ego isn't the only thing running the show. We need the ego to kind of like go to the grocery store and like talk, and be a, an individual self. If we were in a psychedelic state all the time, we'd, be hit by a car because we'd be walking around and, like, whoa, look at this,
look at that tree.
So, it's a key in a lock that we already have access to in a lot of ways. And there are like endogenous ways of getting these states, and music and like ecstatic dance and breath work. These are all ways that traditionally we would access these. And then we have psychedelics come into this culture, which is, in my opinion, there's a lot going wrong in the way that we are very hyper individual and things like that. So psychedelics aren't going to cure that. We need to sort of have a paradigm shift in how we see ourselves and the world and the cosmos, and the psychedelics can kind of hint at that, but ultimately we need to do that work. And for me, it's the community, it's the grassroots level where we can hold those for people to have these big transitions in their lives.
I think that's probably a good place to wrap it up for now. But having said that, this has been a great discussion. I don't think it'll be the last time we discuss this subject on this podcast. So thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having us, John.
This has been Kingston Live. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please share it, tell a friend, or subscribe on your platform of choice. For show listings, artist info, and all things Kingston music, check out kingstonlive.ca. Kingston Live was produced in Kingston by Soundwise. Hosted by Jermaine Marshall and John Sanfilippo. Writing and research by Peter Sanfilippo. Executive producer Rob Howard. We'd love to hear from you. Email us at podcast@kingstonlive.ca.